So from your packet that comes with your math journal, you should have had these two pieces cut out. Both of them on the spine of it say subtracting mixed numbers with borrowing. We're going to look for the one that says on step number 2, convert the fractions to improper fractions. So we're going to do this on the left-hand side of page 68 in our journal. And we're going to first learn how to do subtracting mixed numbers with converting to improper fractions. Again, this is going to be on the left side of page 68. So our very first step is we are going to observe our problem. That's always the first step when we have a fraction problem, is to observe, so we can think about all the things that we notice. Our fraction problem for this is going to be 8 3/7 minus 4 1/2. So what do we observe about this problem? Hopefully we noticed things like it's a subtraction problem, so we know that with addition or subtraction we have to have the same denominators. Hopefully then we observed that we do not have the same denominators. Maybe we observed that this is a unit fraction. We noticed that these are both mixed numbers. So since we recognize that this is subtraction and these aren't the same, our next step is going to be for us to find the least common denominator. So step number 2 is going to be find the least common denominator. And how we do that is we look at our two denominators. We have 7 and 2, and we're going to do what kind of counting? Hopefully we all said skip counting, because we have to find the multiples. So what we're really finding is the least common multiple, but because we're using it as a denominator, we call it the least common denominator. So we're going to skip count by 7. We go 7, 14, 21, 28. Now we're going to skip count by 2. We could go all the way to 9, but I know a lot about numbers, and we know a lot about numbers, and we see some even things up here, and we know that 2 can go into even numbers. So we're going to go 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. We can stop because we finally found one that matches. Our step number 3 is we are going to now rewrite our problem with our new denominators. And we're going to make sure that we do not forget our whole numbers, because that is the most common mistake, is that we just drop down our fractions and we forget our whole numbers. So we're going to drop down our whole numbers first. We have 8 and 4. And then our new denominator is 14. And this is the part when we have to think. We got to think. How did we get from 7 to 14? Well, if we don't know, we just did all of this work. So we're going to look up here. We multiplied by 1, 2. So if we multiplied our denominator by 2, our golden rule is what? Whatever we do to our denominator, we have to do it to our numerator. So we go 3 times 2 is 6. And then we come over here and we do the same thing. How do we get from 2 to 14? Well, we multiplied by 7. Golden rule says we go 1 times 7 is 7. Now that we've rewritten our problem in step 3, we have to stop again and we have to observe it. So one of the other parts of step 3 is we have to observe it again. Because if this numerator is bigger than this numerator, we don't have to do any of the borrowing or the converting work, but we have to stop and make sure we look so that we don't do extra work for no reason. So we observe this and we notice they have the same denominators now. It's a subtraction problem. 6 is smaller than 7, which means that we cannot take 7 away from 6. If I have 6 pieces of candy, I can't give you 7 pieces of candy. So that's when we run into a problem. Just like what we practiced earlier in the video, when we are subtracting whole numbers and we don't have enough in a place value, we go back and we regroup and we borrow from that place value. So we're gonna change this into something that we can work with so we can solve this problem. So our step number 4 is we are going to convert to an improper fraction. So we're going to convert our 8 and 6/14 and our 4 and 7/14 into improper fractions. Well, if we go back and we think about what we learned in 4th grade and what we practiced earlier this year, how do we convert? We multiply our whole number times our denominator, and then we add our numerator, and we place it all over the denominator. Well, that means we have to go and we have to multiply 8 times 14, because I don't know 8 times 14 off the top of my head. So I'm gonna go 14 times 8. I got 8 times 4 is 32. 8 times 1 is 8, plus 3 is 11. And if you remember, I said we have to add our numerator. So we get 6 plus 2 is 8, 1, 1. So we would have 118 all over 14. Minus, and we have to do the same thing here. We have to multiply 14 times 4. 4 times 4 is 16. 4 times 1 is 4, plus 1 is 5. So we get 56, but then we have to add the 7. And we go 6 plus 7 is 13. 5 plus 1 is 6, so we have 63. Now our step 5 is going to be for us to subtract. So we are going to take 118 minus 63, because those are our numerators. 8 minus 3 is 5. 1 minus 6 we can't do, so we have to regroup and borrow. 1 plus 10 is 11. 11 minus 6 is 5. So our answer here is 55/14. Well, what we know about our championship answer, we cannot leave an answer like this unless it asks us to. We're being asked to put everything in the simplest form because, like when we do recipes, we don't use improper fractions, we use mixed numbers. So we just can use a cup instead of a bunch of 1/4 cups. So we have to, our final step for subtracting is we have to then convert it back to a mixed number. We have to convert it back to a mixed number. That means that we have to divide 55 by 14. Well, the first thing I do is I need to figure out my multiples of 14. So I have 14, 28, 42, 56, and I can stop because 56 is greater than 55. So now I divide. I stop and I think, how many times can 14 go into 5? It can't. How many times can 14 go into 55? It can go in 1, 2, 3 times without going over. So I put 3 up here. I go 3 times 14. It is 42. I go 5 minus 2 is 3. 5 minus 4 is 1. This is a good remainder. because it is smaller than our divisor. So we have 3. Our remainder becomes our numerator, and my denominator is 14. So now we have 3 and 13/14. Our final step, whenever we are doing a problem with fractions, or all of the time, we stop and we observe and we think about what we see here. So we're going to observe, because we converted it, but we might have to simplify it. So we look at this problem and we think about what we observe. Hopefully we're recognizing that 13 is an odd number. Well, because it's odd, it means its factors are only 1 and 13. Well, 1 goes into 14, but does 13 go into 14? So 3 and 13/14 is our championship answer, which means that is the end of our whole process. So there are 6 steps for us to do when we are converting to improper fractions.